Hello and welcome to Newsday. Reporting live from Singapore, I'm Steve Lai. These are the headlines. The US Supreme Court rules Donald Trump is partially immune from prosecution for actions taken while in the White House. The former president says it's a good day for democracy. Hurricane Beryl threatens the Caribbean islands. It strengthens to a Category 4 and hits Grenada. And French politicians seek alliances aiming to block the far right from securing an absolute majority in parliament. The US Supreme Court has ruled that Donald Trump has some immunity from prosecution for official actions taken while he was in the White House. A lower court will now decide how to apply this ruling to criminal indictments he faces and which of his actions qualify as official. And that will be delayed well beyond November's election. The former president described the decision as a big win. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, reports.
The powerful Supreme Court has the final say on what presidents can and cannot do. Today's historic ruling means a president can never be prosecuted for anything that's part of their official duties, but they do not have immunity for non-official acts. So what does this mean for the criminal cases against Donald Trump?
Fight for Trump! Fight for Trump!
When he spoke to supporters on January the 6th, was he officially acting as the president or as the losing candidate?
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Donald Trump is facing criminal charges related to the January the 6th riot and attempting to overturn the election results. As his supporters stormed the Capitol building, they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," angry with the vice president because he refused to block the certification of Joe Biden as president. Mr. Pence had to be evacuated from his office. Donald Trump cannot now be prosecuted for all the conversations in which he had been pressuring Mike Pence to overturn the election results. The Supreme Court did not say whether all the charges Donald Trump is facing are covered by presidential immunity, so it's going to have to be argued out in a lower court which of his actions were official presidential acts and have immunity, and which were not, meaning he can still be prosecuted for them. Trump is also facing charges in the state of Georgia for trying to overturn the election result there. He phoned a local official and asked him to find more votes.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
A court will have to rule on whether he was acting as president or not when he made that call. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a more liberal judge, completely disagrees with the ruling, saying, "In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. If he orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organises a military coup to hold on to power, immune."
Until now, every president who has served in the United States has understood that he could be prosecuted if he engaged in criminal conduct while president. Going forward, presidents know they're free.
The most immediate effect of this ruling will be to further delay the 3 court cases Mr. Trump is still facing, making it all but certain they will not come to court before November's election.
Now, a few moments ago, President Joe Biden responded to that ruling.
The presidency is the most powerful office in the world. It's an office that not only tests your judgment, perhaps even more importantly, it's an office that can test your character. Because you not only face moments when you need the courage to exercise the full power of the presidency, you also face moments where you need the wisdom to respect the limits of the power of the office of the presidency. This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the President alone. This decision today has continued the Court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away a woman's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation. Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking at the Capitol, a mob literally hunting down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, gallows erected to hang the Vice President, Mike Pence. I think it's fair to say it's one of the darkest days in the history of America. Now the man who sent that mob to the U.S. Capitol is facing potential criminal conviction
I'm going to get her take.
for what happened that day. And the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts before the upcoming election. The public has a right to know the answer about what happened on January 6th before they are asked to vote again this year. Now, because of today's decision, that is highly, highly unlikely. It's a terrible disservice to the people of this nation. So now the American people will have to do what the courts should have been willing to do, but will not. The American people have to render a judgment about Donald Trump's behavior. The American people must decide whether Donald Trump's assault on our democracy on January 6th makes him unfit for public office in the highest office in the land. The American people must decide if Trump's embrace of violence to preserve his power is acceptable. Perhaps most importantly, the American people must decide if they want to entrust the President once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it. You know, at the outset of our nation, it was the character of George Washington, our first president, that defined the presidency. He believed power was limited, not absolute, and that power always resides with the people, always. Now, over 200 years later, with today's Supreme Court decision, once again, it will depend on the character of the men and women who hold that presidency that are going to define the limits of the power of the presidency, because the law will no longer do it. I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years, but any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent. May God bless you all, and may God help preserve our democracy. Thank you. And may God protect our troops.
President Joe Biden speaking there. Let's get some reaction from Peter Bowes, who's been watching the president speak. For more, let's cross over to him in Los Angeles. Peter, what's your main takeaway having watched his full remarks?
Well, that was a very powerful statement from Joe Biden, speaking from the White House, talking about a dangerous precedent that has now been set by the Supreme Court in this ruling that he believed for a long time that nobody was above the law. But here the president saying he thinks that has fundamentally changed now, and that a president, a future president, whether it be Donald Trump or someone else, could essentially do whatever they liked in that particular role. He says he believes that Donald Trump will be emboldened by what the Supreme Court has decided. And then he kind of pivoted, as we've just heard, to the election, saying that it's now up to, as he sees it, the American people to offer their dissent to this decision by the way that they vote in the November election. So very quickly he has turned this around to be a central election issue. Of course, it's crucially important for Donald Trump in terms of his, let's say, his ability to stand in this election. He has these 3 criminal cases still hanging over him. very unlikely that any of them will take place before the election, which of course is a big boost for Donald Trump. But now here, Joe Biden making this a central election issue, asking the American people to judge the Supreme Court in terms of what they think of the court giving presidents these unprecedented powers.
Thanks very much, Peter, for getting us across that. Peter Bowe speaking to us in Los Angeles. Now let's carry on with the story and join up with Julia Manchester, a political reporter at The Hill. Julia, thanks for your time today. Just want to get your reaction first to what you heard from President Trump, President Biden there reacting to this Supreme Court ruling. Were we expecting him to make these remarks?
Look, we were expecting, some sort of response from the White House, and I think this was a prime opportunity for President Biden to deliver some very forceful remarks on an issue that has become quite galvanizing for the Democratic base. And that issue is the Supreme Court's rulings in a number, various areas like abortion. But today it was presidential immunity. So I think President Biden certainly delivered on that. That being said, though, this comes days after what many have called a disastrous debate performance from President Biden, where he was not quick on his feet in the debate against Donald Trump. And he was seen as weak and at times stumbling and unable to form really a coherent sentence. So I think this was certainly a bit of an opportunity to bounce back. But at the same time, though, I don't think it necessarily calms any nerves about the president, criticism about the president's mental acuity to serve in office. These were pre-prepared remarks. He was able to rehearse them. He did not take any questions from the public. So, I think this move came with some opportunity, but also some risks as well.
Yeah, speaking about the opportunity, he did seem very keen to link what has happened with the Supreme Court ruling to the election that's coming up in November, saying that the people must now decide on Trump.
Yeah, it makes sense that he would say that, because we know that former President Trump, when he was campaigning for president all the way back in 2016 and 2015, when he announced his presidency, he talked about this idea of appointing more conservative judges and justices to lower courts and the Supreme Court. And, one thing you've heard Republicans say and Democrats say as well is that a lot of these rulings that have come out of the Supreme Court are a result of former President Trump and Republicans looking to push more conservatives on the high court and in lower courts. So right now you have Democrats essentially trying to campaign on this issue of the Supreme Court, essentially saying, elect President Biden, elect Democrats down the ballot in the Senate, House, et cetera, Democratic judges, to sort of push back on, that precedent set by Republicans who really, appointed all these judges and justices in the first place.
Now, President Biden was keen to draw on the dissenting remarks from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. He said that, referencing her, he said that the president is now a king above the law. That was her quote. What sort of actions could this open the door to? What are the big concerns?
I think there's going to be concerns that, if a president were to commit, some crime or something, some illegal action when he's not president, or he or she is not president, they wouldn't be held accountable, essentially. And that's the question here with Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of questions as to whether he will be held accountable in a number of these federal cases that he's facing. And there's this idea that this, and you heard it from Sonia Sotomayor, the justice who dissented in this, there's this idea that this makes the presidency more like maybe a dictatorship or an absolute monarchy in some way, where you have a figurehead, a leader who basically can do whatever they want, and they don't have to have those consequences. They don't have any checks on them. So that's the argument you're hearing from liberals and those who disagree with this decision.
Well, former President Trump has been convicted of 34 counts. We know that already, but there are other trials or trial cases waiting for him. This ruling by the Supreme Court, how is that going to impact those going forward?
Yeah, so it could impact the case in Georgia, for example, the case, the federal documents case, when there were questions as to whether he illegally took those classified documents and brought them to Mar-a-Lago. So there's a question as to whether he will ultimately be prosecuted for those cases. It seems like prosecutors are going to push along with this because there are questions about this ruling. But one thing is for certain, we likely won't get a ruling before before November. So Donald Trump could win the election and we could still be in this purgatory or area of limbo where we don't know what's going to happen with these cases.
Julia, thank you for your time today and helping us understand the recent developments in the US. So Julia Manchester, our political reporter at The Hill. Now, Donald Trump's former top advisor, Steve Bannon, reported to prison on Monday to serve a 4-month sentence. He was convicted for defying a congressional subpoena from a committee probing the January 6th, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Mr. Bannon claims his conversations with then-President Trump that day should be protected under executive privilege. But on Friday, the Supreme Court rejected a last-minute bid to delay his sentence. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, sat down with Mr. Bannon for an interview last week, and she began by asking him how he feels about his prison sentence.
How do you feel about that?
It doesn't make any difference. I was 4 years on a Navy ship. I've served my country now for the last 10 or so years, focusing on this. If I have to do it in prison, I do it in prison. It makes no difference at all.
Now, we're still several months away from the election.
Yes.
Do you accept it is possible that Joe Biden could fairly win the election in November?
Impossible. No, but we're not. Remember, early voting, the ballots get mailed, but early voting starts in this country, I think, around mid-September. So we're only like 100 days away from when it really starts.
But if you say it's impossible for him to win fairly,
he didn't win.
You're declaring now, are you, that if he is declared the winner?
Hang on.
But are you saying that if he's declared the winner in November, you will claim that the election's been stolen?
Hang on. He didn't win in 2020. He's totally and completely illegitimate. This is the basic railhead. This is why this show, our audience, have never wavered from this, ever.
You know that there were 60 court cases in which judges found no evidence of any widespread electoral fraud.
That is not true. They didn't have standing. They did not have standing. That's not true. This has never been adjudicated.
But looking ahead to this November, if he's declared the winner, you will immediately cry foul and say it's been stolen.
How do you say declared winner? Declared winner by certification by the states? He will not get certified by the states. He would not have been certified by the states last time if we didn't have the fiasco of January 6th.
You are telling supporters that they need to get ready to fight back if the Democrats try to steal the election. So what does that mean?
We mean just like in tables just like this, where remember, it's not votes, it's ballots. Right now, we've trained up an army of poll workers, poll watchers, election officials. We have been training up for years. Lawyers are going to be ready, and this time they're going to have their filings ready to go, and they'll be outside the courthouse.
And just some clarification on those comments. President Biden fairly won the 2020 election as certified by all 50 states and Washington, D.C. that year. According to PolitiFact, a nonpartisan fact-checking operation run by the Poynter Institute, Mr. Trump's election fraud lawsuits failed either due to error or lack of evidence. In addition, the Associated Press reviewed every case of potential voter fraud in the 6 battleground states disputed by Mr. Trump and found fewer than 475. These cases would not have changed the outcome in any state. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're on live with the BBC News. Now, a dangerous Category 4 storm is moving through the Caribbean with wind speeds of more than 200 kilometers an hour. Power is down across the island of Grenada as Hurricane Beryl sweeps through. Reports from the tiny island of Carriacou, which is part of Grenada, say it's being flattened by the storm. The storm is also churning up life-threatening storm surges, and leaders of nearby islands have all issued hurricane warnings. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent said he was expecting a natural disaster that could continue for days. It's already passed through Barbados, leaving a trail of damage. Now, Beryl is the most powerful hurricane ever recorded in June, and of a strength not normally seen until much later in the season. Now take a look at the map of its predicted path. A true landfall with the eye passing over a coast may not occur, but even so, Beryl will unleash a devastating blow to the nearest islands. Now, Will Grant is monitoring the storm from Mexico City.
Well, we're hearing that particularly some smaller islands off Grenada have been essentially cut off communications down to Carriacou and to a place called Petit Martinique. So both of those are essentially incommunicado at the moment, so the authorities don't know just how bad things are, and being small islands off an island nation, one can imagine that it's very low lying and will have received the full brunt of the storm as it passed over. I mean, in essence, that lack of communication is becoming a real difficulty as the hurricane makes its way through the Caribbean. I've been in contact with a reporter in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and he can't now currently get word out very easily either. So things are difficult, as you can imagine. It always takes a little time when large or major hurricanes pass through the Caribbean to get a full snapshot of just how bad the devastation is, where the worst devastation has been wrought, and I think we're in that point now, just trying to kind of assess what the damage is and wait for updates from the authorities themselves.
Guy Vital-Hearn from World Vision in Haiti told us how they are preparing for the incoming impact of the hurricane.
Right now, Vision is pre-positioning. We are pre-positioning some items just in case the hurricane actually strikes some communities in Haiti. All the predictions say that it will not have a direct impact, but we are pre-positioning, also informing communities of the upcoming storm so that they also can make some preparations.
And in the last few years, Haiti has been hit by several natural disasters, political unrest as well. How vulnerable is the state of the country?
Oh, very, very vulnerable. Now we're talking since 2010. It's been disaster after disaster. After the 2010 earthquake, Hurricane Matthew, it was a Category 4 hurricane, went straight through the southern hemisphere. And then in 2021, we had the earthquake also in the southern hemisphere. And lately, it's all the political and gang violences in Haiti that have devastated communities, families, and particularly children in Haiti. So as of right now, Haiti is definitely not ready for something like that, even as they predict heavy rains that could cause flooding, landslides. And in the past, we've seen those rains causing also roads being flooded, diminishing logistical capacities, and even collapsed bridges. So it would be very catastrophic for Haiti to be highly impacted by Beryl right now.
Let's take a look at some other stories in the headlines. At least 9 people were killed and 4 others injured when a car plowed into a crowd of people in the South Korean capital, Seoul. A man believed to be in his 60s drove the vehicle into pedestrians waiting at a traffic stop. Police say they are investigating the incident and warn casualty numbers might increase. Officials in Japan have begun imposing restrictions on the number of tourists allowed to climb the country's famous Mount Fuji. Only 4,000 people a day will now be allowed to use the popular Yoshida Trail, and they'll each be charged $13 to do so. Last summer, close to 250,000 people climbed Mount Fuji, leading to congested paths littered with rubbish. A space rocket owned by a private Chinese company has accidentally launched itself during a test before crash landing into a hillside. Footage on social media shows the rocket falling back to Earth and exploding in China's Henan province on Sunday. The company responsible for the rocket said a structural failure caused the rocket to take off. And Australia says it has more than doubled the visa fee for international students. The move is the latest effort by the government to rein in record migration numbers, putting pressure on the housing market. Additionally, visitor visa holders and students with temporary graduate visas are now banned from applying onshore for a student visa. And before we go, some video from London, where military horses broke free and ran loose through the centre of the city on Monday. It's the second such incident since April. The UK Ministry of Defence said the 3 horses came loose from their riders during exercises, and they were soon returned to their barracks. One of the horses sustained minor injuries. None of the horses that escaped were involved in the previous late April incident. Do stay with us here on BBC News. I'll be back shortly with Business Today. Great as always to have you with us. I'm Steve Lai. Bye for now.
Hello there. Not much change to the weather as we move into